Hey guys, hello everyone. This is International Master Asaf Givon here, and today I wanted to present you with what I call a rapid opening repertoire, and more specifically, I want to talk about the Four Knights Sicilian. And throughout my career as a chess player, I always considered the Four Knights Sicilian to be a Sicilian line, basically for lazy people or for people who don't have time to study that much theory. Because, as some of you might know, the Sicilian Defense is an opening which can sometimes be extremely theoretical. So, in this video, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can from this opening. This is not going to be absolutely comprehensive, but it can give you a general idea of how to play this Sicilian system with confidence, and hopefully you can score some nice games with it. So after the moves e4, c5, knight f3, our opening line starts with the move e6. So technically you can also reach our scheme with the move knight c6, but I want to avoid white's possibility of going bishop to b5, which is called the Rossolimo Sicilian, and we would like to avoid it altogether. This is why we play e6. Here the move bishop b5 would make little to no sense because there is no knight to attack on c6. White plays d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. This is one of our may kind of already a little bit of a crossroads. In the next two moves, we want to develop both of our knights in order to reach the Four Knights Sicilian. So it's important to start with the move knight to f6 specifically, hitting the pawn on e4, already setting up a small trap. If white thinks that he can play e5 in order to punish us for developing our knight prematurely, and he thinks that we are going to move our knight, we have an unpleasant surprise for him. We have this little check, queen a5, and on the next move, regardless of how white is going to block the check, we're going to collect the pawn on e5. So after the move knight f6, white's most sensible move would be knight to c3. And here we play knight to c6. This is the starting point of the Four Knights Sicilian. This is one of those variations in the Sicilian that you are less likely to see in very high level chess, because if white really knows what he is doing, usually he will gain a small advantage at least. But for a club player or a beginner player, this is a perfect weapon to make white uncomfortable in the opening. So this opening is based on two principles. One of them is creating a lot of pressure on white's center. We can see both of our knights already creating strong pressure against the center. Very soon our bishop will come on b4 to pin white's knight on c3, and he will help us to put even more pressure on the white center. So basically we try already within the first moves to put a lot of pressure on our opponent to force him to make some concessions. The second principle which leads us is that we want to be able to play the breakthrough pawn to d5 as early as possible. Basically, this is the two things that we should always look up to. We need to look for the opportunity to play bishop b4 and then the pawn on d5. Sometimes we also play the move d5 before the move bishop to b4. So let's take some moves that white can try. First of all, I will already tell you that the best moves that white have in this position are, let me just get rid of those arrows, is knight to b5. It's one of the best moves with the idea to infiltrate on d6. The second move is the move knight takes c6, with which we'll take a look later. But those two moves are not necessarily the first move which come to mind to most chess players. Most chess players in this position would like to make some developing move. So, for example, you might encounter a move like bishop e3 in many of your games, a very logical move. Many people want to play bishop e3 with the idea to go queen d2 and castle long. But in our opening system, we're not going to allow that so easily. So as you might remember, what we are trying to do here is very quickly play bishop b4 and d5. So here it's easy to guess black's next move, bishop to b4, already threatening to take white's pawn on e4. So white has to play a move to defend this pawn. For example, bishop to d3 looks reasonable. And then what would be black's next move? Keep in mind those two little principles that we talked about earlier. Yes, the answer is pawn to d5. Striking in the center. If white is not reacting to this, we might even consider putting our other pawn on e5. And if at any point white chooses to capture our pawn, we can even capture with our knight. And you see that black is having tremendous pressure against white's position already. White should avoid this position probably. What else? What if white plays bishop e2? Well, the same story. If white does nothing special, we would like to play the move bishop to b4. The same idea, attacking the pawn on e4. White actually does not have a very comfortable way of defending the pawn on e4. The move f3 is slightly weakening. The move queen d3 puts the queen on a slightly awkward position. For example, if white plays a move like f3, we can once again strike with the move d5. Already white is facing some problems with his natural development, because if he just ignores everything and castles, he already faces some problems on the long diagonal for the king. So already moves like queen b6 and bishop c5 come to mind, and white already faces some problems. So the best thing that white can do here is actually to castle, sacrifice the pawn. So bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop. You can see that white's pawn structure has been slightly shattered. White does get some compensation here. So knight takes pawn on e4. White's compensation is based on the fact that our dark squares around the king are slightly weak, but we should be able to handle this pretty comfortably. It's just important not to be delayed with our development, so we should castle as soon as possible and support our knight on e4, which can be attacked pretty soon. Black should be fine here. Once again, I would go deeper, but that's like a more of an overview of an opening. I want to give you like the basics of how to play this opening. If you want to go deeper than that, I will suggest either going to some kind of chess literature or the great actually course of the Remote Chess Academy about the Sicilian Defense would be also a good source. So another option is to play the move a3. This is like a little prophylactic move. If white is very scared about black's bishop b4 idea, he might make this move. But honestly, such a move like pawn to a3 cannot really challenge black's setup so much. It's a very slow move, and black should not be fearing such move. One option for black here is just to play a move such as d6 or queen c7 and play a normal Sicilian looking type of game, only with white spending already a tempo, let's say, for not a very useful move like a3. Or even more in the spirit of this opening, we can play the move pawn to d5 with the idea that if white takes on d5, we take back with the pawn. We do get the isolated queen's pawn position, but black is very active. Here he can play bishop to d6, castle, and hope that his two bishops will grant him some attacking chances on the king side. Black is completely fine here. So let us move. Let me get rid of those arrows. So let us move to the two main lines of the Four Knights Sicilian. Let's start with the move knight to b5. Arguably the most popular move here. White is threatening to go knight to d6, but we are going to be very faithful to our main principle of this opening, which is to go for a quick bishop to b4. That's a very key move to remember because it might look scary at the first glance because it still allows the white knight to go to d6 as he planned. But here we are going to play a very cunning move. We are going to lose our right to castle with the move king to e7, but with a very good purpose. First of all, his knight on d6 is under attack. If the knight just moves away randomly, let's say knight to back to b5. By the way, this is already, I think, the fourth or even the fifth time that this knight has moved in this game. We can just push him away and take a free pawn in the center. If white chooses to take our bishop on c8, we are also pretty happy with that because he got rid of our very bad bishop on c8, and we can make a free developing move with our rook, which is already nicely positioned on the open file. And in this position, even though black has lost his right to castle, he is actually doing quite okay. He is extremely well developed, and in the next couple of moves he might simply make an artificial castling with the moves rook to e8, king f8, and king to g8, and once his king is safe, his position should be completely fine. And the last point is that if white tries to defend his knight on d6 with the move bishop f4, then we can just chase it away with the move e5, where already white is facing some tactical problems with his hanging pieces. So important moment here to keep in mind that the best move is actually king e7, not an intuitive move, but black can allow himself to make such a move because he's superior development. So the best move in this position, and what most grandmasters and strong players play, is pawn to a3. The bishop doesn't really have any good squares to retreat to, he must capture on c3. White recaptures with the knight. Obviously, he needs to defend his pawn on e4. And following the principles of this opening, we should opt for a quick d5. Let's do it sooner rather than later. Pawn to d5. White usually captures on d5. And here there are two choices. It's completely possible to take with the knight on d5. It's completely possible to take with the pawn. In this video, I will suggest to take with the pawn, which is the main line. Knight takes d5 is completely okay. E takes d5 I think is slightly easier to play. Usually white goes bishop d3, black castles, and pushes his pawn to d4. So in this position, white is having the advantage of the two bishops, and also the black pawn on d4 might be considered as weak, but he is also a pretty good pawn because it slightly restricts white's pieces. But as a compensation for white's two bishops, black is extremely active. He has good outposts for his knights. The black bishop can come to g4 on the next move. One possible idea would be to play bishop g4 followed by bishop h5 and bishop g6 to exchange white's good bishop. He already has some open files for his rook, so for example after knight e2 you can also consider moves like rook e8. So black is more or less doing fine here. Of course, if white is playing very well, he probably does have a small advantage here because of the two bishops, but there is not too much to complain here for black. So that wraps up the move knight to b5. And now let us move to the sharpest option that white has, which is the move knight takes c6. This move is a very concrete move. in general, it's not desirable for white to improve black's pawn structure in this way, but he's doing that only for one reason, which is to be able to play the move pawn to e5. If you remember, this move earlier was not possible because of black's little tactical idea, but here it's possible. Black obviously doesn't want to retreat his knight, so he will go to the center. And now a very important move for white is knight to e4. Not knight takes d5, which only helped black to strengthen his position in the center even more. But with this move, white has two ideas in mind. One of them is at some point to infiltrate with the knight on d6, but also to make room for the c2 pawn to move to c4 and push our knight away from d5. In this position, black should play the move queen to c7, getting a tempo on white's pawn on e5. White has to play pawn to f4, and in this position there are many moves that black has tried over the years. The main line would be queen to b6 with the idea knight to e3, but I'm going to suggest a slightly more rare move, which is pawn to f5, hitting the white knight on e4, trying to chase it away from its active position. So if white plays the move knight d6 check, black can take it. Notice that we cannot take the pawn on d6 because of the move pawn to c4, when black will lose material because of the pin on the d file. But we can just play the move queen to b6, and actually white is having some troubles developing his pieces because the black queen will forever block his right to castle. So white takes en passant on f6, and we takes pawn takes f6. This position is very double-edged. White is having the opportunity to deny black's castling with the move queen h5 check, but on the other hand, black has a very strong pawn formation in the center, a very good knight on d5. His pieces will be developed pretty rapidly in the game. The bishop can come to b4, the rook already has an open file on b8. In some positions, the other rook has an open file on g8. So a simple line would be the move pawn to c4 here. A logical move, trying to dislodge black's strong knight on d5. Black plays the move bishop to b4 check, using the fact that white can no longer play the move pawn to c3. And after the move bishop to d2, there is a little tactical subtlety here. Black can play queen takes f4, using the fact that the bishop on d2 is pinned, and also hitting the knight on e4. So if white takes on d5, we take the knight with a gain of check, and we win even one more pawn on d5. So this wraps it up. So the Four Knights Sicilian is a very cunning little sideline. Not really a sideline, but perhaps not the most popular Sicilian line, but a one which the white player should be very careful when playing against. And I will suggest this line for anybody who searches to play the Sicilian defense but want to be slightly tricky in the opening, doesn't want to study too much opening theory. This line can work out perfectly for him. And if you want to get some more information and more experience and investigating some other Sicilian lines, I will recommend Remote Chess Academy's course on the Sicilian defense pawn structures. I've reviewed it, it's really professional. There will be a link in the description, and I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Thank you for watching. See you, bye bye.